You're listening to Let's Talk About Fatherlessness with host Sean Teis, where we talk about leading fatherless families to the Heavenly Father.
Hey, welcome back to Let's Talk About Fatherlessness. My name is Sean Teis. I'm excited to have my guest today, Zach Garza, man. It's great to have you. I love what you guys are doing at youcanmentor.com. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks a lot, Sean. Really appreciate you, man.
Now, go ahead and tell us more about yourself. Just kind of give us a brief summary. We're going to dive deep into it, but give us a brief summary about yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Zach Garza. I'm married. I've got a 9-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 5-year-old. I'm down here in Waco, Texas. And yeah, just trying to do, different kinds of ministries that have to do with being a father, overcoming growing up without a father, and helping men mentor kids who don't have a father. So all things fathering, my man. That's me.
When did you start You Can Mentor? Well, how long ago was that?
I started You Can Mentor in 2019 as a side gig with my first not-for-profit.
Okay.
And so, yeah, kind of feel like the Lord has a tendency with me to anything that I have an opportunity to experience and kind of figure out how to overcome ish, that he kind of gives me that and uses it as a tool in my tool belt. So I started a nonprofit, got the idea in 2009, became a 501c3 in 2011. And I had no idea how to run a not-for-profit. We mentored kids who didn't have a dad. And I didn't have the first idea about anything in regards to not-for-profit stuff. I didn't know how to fundraise, didn't know how to cast a vision, didn't know how to deal with a board or recruit or do any of that stuff. And just I had some men come alongside me and kind of teach me not only how to mentor, but how to run kind of a business. And so the heart behind You Can Mentor is we want to see every community in America have someone mentoring kids who come from harder places, right? So they don't have a dad, growing up in poverty. And we want to help equip and encourage people who want to start mentoring efforts, whether that's through a church or through a 501c3. And so that's how we started You Can Mentor. But yeah, so anything that anyone needs to mentor, we want to help them do that. So that's
great. I love, and one of the things that you and I were introduced by Brian Johnson from Psalm 68.5 Ministries. Yeah. We both have worked with him and done different things. And one of the things I loved about your organization when I first heard of it is just the name, how simple it is. I love that because a lot of times we overcomplicate mentoring. I believe the devil overcomplicates mentoring, where he makes people think that it's such a complicated thing that it's just too much to get involved in. And so why even do it? And so I love the name You Can Mentor because it's just like, oh, okay, I can do that. I mean, it just makes it simple. Have you gotten a lot of responses like that?
And so anyone can mentor, right? So, I mean, you don't have to have, experience with kids. You don't have to know a ton about the Bible. I mean, obviously it helps, but like you just have to show up. And you just have to make this kid feel like they have value, feel like they have worth. Our hope is that when a kid experiences you, they experience the person of Christ. And there's so many kids out there, especially kids who are growing up without a father, who need that attention, who need that affirmation, who need that acceptance, who just want one person who is in their corner, one person who loves them no matter what. And I feel like it's our call to love God and then to love others and then to make disciples. And a great way, a great opportunity to do that is by mentoring. And so that's what we did in our first not-for-profit. And then we are helping people do that with You Can Mentor. And so, yeah, just the more godly people in the lives of our kids, the better. That's kind of my philosophy. But yeah, man, it's super simple. Like, just show up and support them, and you would be amazed at what the Lord can do with that.
That's great. And now, I mean, we're going to dive into your book and everything like that, but I mean, just kind of staying on this track of mentoring. I mean, it's what impacted my life. I would not be talking to you right now if I didn't have these mentors in my life that poured into me. So I'm just looking at your website right now and how there's just images scrolling across these kids being mentored, and it just speaks to my heart because it's such a an amazing thing. So if there's somebody listening to this right now that is, they're curious about mentoring, what would you say to them on how to get started?
Man, I think how to get started. I mean, there's a bunch of different ways to mentor, right? We have a podcast that's called You Can Mentor. And we have an episode on, hey, if you want to mentor through a church, that's a great option. If you want to mentor through a not-for-profit, that's a great option. If you want to mentor organically, whether that's through a school or whether that's through, meeting a kid through sports, like, that's awesome too. So any way that you want to impact a kid's life, we are 100% open for that. And so if you would like to get involved, I would ask your church pastor. I would see if there's anyone in the community who is trying to mentor already, and see if you can hop on with them. Obviously, we have to be safe. Obviously, it works out a ton better whenever you have the mom's buy-in. There are specific things that we should do as a mentor, but I would be willing to bet there's someone in your community who is trying to do that. And my advice would be to try to team up with them. Ask them out to coffee. Say, hey, I feel like the Lord is encouraging me to invest into the life of a kid. How should I go about doing that? And then just kind of see what happens.
Yeah. And like, it's just simple. It's a simple thing. Get plugged into another program or a church program, or just make it safe and make it safe for the kids. And I love what you said about having the mom involved, making sure she's on board with it. That's so good. Yeah.
And so we asked the question, who's the most important person in the life of this kid, especially if they don't have a dad around, right? It's mom. And so what we found was, if mom's on board and the kid's not, eventually the kid will be on board, right? Because mom is going to be like, you will go to that program and you will spend time with the mentor, right? But if mom's not on board, but the kid is, right? The kid loves it. Oh my gosh, this is so much fun. I just love my mentor. But if mom's not on board, eventually the kid won't be either. So I say, if you really want the most impact, it's not just serving the kid. It's serving the kid and building a relationship with mom. You aren't coming in and trying to fix this kid. You're coming in and you're building a relationship with mom and son. And so one of the mistakes that I made early on was, I'm just going to spend time with the kid and I'm not going to worry about mom, right? But what the Lord kind of showed me was, hey, Zach, look, like, I'm a father to the fatherless, but I'm also a defender of the widow, and I set the lonely in families. So this isn't you mentoring a kid. This is you and your family getting to know a mom and her son, their family. So it's not one-on-one, but instead it's my family on their family. That is what I have found works best. So, but yeah, like, what a great way. If mom is doing well, more times than not, the kid is too. If mom's having a hard time, more times than not, the kid is having a hard time as well. So mom's super important.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's one of the things we do as a ministry. We start single mom groups, and this does. You and I need to talk more about this. I mean, we can partner in that, because we have a curriculum and everything. And I'd love to talk to you more about getting single mom groups going with even some of the churches you work with. Because it's definitely a big deal. Now let's go back into your Zachary Garza childhood. I'm not sure, you're probably called Zachary when you were a kid, I'm guessing. But Zach, the kid, talk about
Yeah.
your childhood. Would you share your story with us of how you grew up and just how God brought you through that?
Sure. So I grew up. I've got um, four half brothers, uh, and my mom was married once before. My dad was married two times um, before they got married, and so I was just kind of born into a family that had a history of kind of harder marriages, right? And so everything was good. My mom was a teacher, my dad was a firefighter, and then one day whenever I was 13, my dad came into my room and said, "Hey man, I found someone else, and I am leaving." And so we found out just that he had been kind of seeing this person for years, and man, it was just a really really hard time. We went from being a family of four. It was me and my older half brother and my mom and my dad, to it just being me and my mom overnight. And my mom had a hard time with that. Um, Obviously, she was kind of dealing with her own stuff, and so uh, I I kind of felt like not only did my dad leave us physically whenever I was 13, but my mom kind of left emotionally. And so from um, eighth grade on, I just kind of felt alone,
Mm.
and I would do whatever I had to do to get what I needed. Right. So if I needed attention, I would do anything to earn that. If I needed acceptance, you know, I would do anything to receive that. And so I was just kind of lost. And I got into some kind of trouble, but not anything kind of crazy. I had people in my life. You know, I had a youth pastor. I had a neighbor who I say they kind of kept me on the right path ish. Right.
Mm.
Um, but it wasn't until I got to college and I had a professor named Bob. And Bob was what I would say the first man in my life who really I felt like he liked to be with me. He pursued me. After my dad left, you know, I was filled with anger. I didn't like him. I had a hard time showing my emotion. I didn't like asking for help. I had a really hard time putting any kind of trust with other people. I mean, just all of the basic things that come with growing up without a father figure. But Bob just continued to pursue me, right? Like I would go down to his office and we would have conversations, and I eventually started to work for him. And then my senior year of college, Bob asked me to go to a men's like little Bible study. And I'm a big guy, right? I'm 6'8". At the time, I was like 265, and I was the biggest guy on my school's campus. I
Mm.
went to a pretty conservative um, Christian school, and I not only was I the biggest guy on campus, but I also um, kind of I partied. And when people saw me coming, they're like, "Oh, there's Zach. He's the big guy, big personality, and he's a partier." So I walk into this men's uh, little Bible study, and I look around, and it's all these dudes who are just like, I mean, they are perfect. Like they haven't ever sinned. And I walk in, and I'm just feeling like, what am I doing here? Like like I do not feel like this is my spot.
Yeah.
But I sit down. Why? Because Bob pursued me. And I didn't know it then, but whatever Bob asked me to do, I do, because I yearned for that acceptance, right? I yearned for a man to pursue me. So he said, go, I went. And he started talking about the father heart of God. And he said, hey, you know, God put your father here on earth to be an example of him. You know, God is kind, God is patient. So is your father. But what if you didn't have a father who was like that? And as he's saying this, I felt something kind of stir up, right? And I hadn't cried since my dad left. Um, that was 9 years. It had been 9 years. And as Bob starting to talk about fathers and starting to talk about God, I can't help myself, Don, and I just start weeping.
Hmm.
So here I am, this guy who is a tough guy. I'm a big guy, and I am just in tears. And everyone's like, "What is going on with this guy? Like, what's going on with Garza?" So um, I get super embarrassed and I leave. Right. Well, Bob sees me leave, and he comes chasing after me, and he finds me and he grabs me by the back of the neck and he pulls me in for a hug. First time that a man had, that a man had hugged me in a long, long time, and I'm just weeping. And he says, "Zach, I love you and I'm proud of you, but you have to forgive your father because it's killing you." And so I was like, "Okay, Mom, yeah, okay." And I wish I could say at that moment I changed, but I didn't. But what I do believe is that I was going down this path of becoming just like my dad, of becoming just like my uncle, just like all of my cousins, right? It was a bad path. But the Lord used Bob's relationship to put me on a path of life. And for the next 8 years, God, in his kindness, put men in my life to teach me how to be a man, teach me how to shake a hand, teach me how to make eye contact, teach me how to pursue a girl, teach me how to be a, um, like follow Jesus. That's a big deal, right? Teach me how to forgive my dad, right? These men taught me all of these things. And that ultimately led to me kind of giving everything over to the Lord whenever I was 28. Whenever that happened, I kind of felt like I had this call to become what I did never have as a father and to help kids who were just like me. So my profession, I was a 8th grade football coach in kind of a tougher school up in Dallas. So I'm on fire. Um, I'm on fire. I'm on fire for God. I have this call. I have a mentor. I was introduced to Steve Allen. He's my mentor. He taught me how to forgive my dad. He facilitated a time to have me meet with my dad, who I hadn't seen in a long, long time. I was able to sit down and I was able to truly forgive him. And when that happened, I could tangibly feel, Sean, chains being torn off of my chest, and I felt free. And I was on fire. I went back as a teacher and I said, I want other kids to experience what I've experienced, right? My life has been transformed by God, by facing my pain, by facing my wound and walking out and forgiving my dad. So I asked my team one day after football, I said, who in here comes from a home where they don't have a father figure present? There's 65 kids on my team, 45 with their hands popped up. Oh my gosh, there's 45 kids who are just like me. How did God transform my life? By using men to invest into me by relationship. Well, I'm going to do the same thing. So I started to mentor some kids. Some men saw what I was up to. They said, "Hey, how can I help?" We started a 501c3, and that's how we started our first not-for-profit. That is called it's called Forerunner Mentoring Program up in Dallas, and we serve the fatherless and the single mom. We do one-on-one mentoring. We do after school. We do summer camps, and we serve our moms. And so I did that from 2011 to 2020, and that's still going on now. So started You Can Mentor in 2018 with all of our staff. And man, we just want to see people's lives transformed by relationships. We want to make disciples by way of mentoring, specifically to the fatherless. So yeah, man, that's kind of my story. 2014 got married, had some kiddos, and I'm here today. So yeah.
Powerful story. And I want to unpack some of that a little more. Like,
sure.
One of the things that we have seen recently is the issue of anger. And I know I grew up with a lot of anger, but I had somebody tell me recently that they were referencing this one boy, and they said that anger doesn't come from fatherlessness. And I was kind of blown away because I'm like, I know that I struggle with anger, and even your story of anger. I've had many kids I've worked with and people we've tried to help. And so talk about more about that anger that you said you had. What did it cause? What was it like for you with the anger against your dad?
Yeah, that's a good question, Sean. I just feel like whenever you grow up without a father, the enemy can just have a field day with lies, right?
Mhm.
And I mean, as a kid, you start to compare, well, I'm not like this family. I don't have a dad. Any kid who grew up without a dad around knows the feeling of my dad's not at my game. My dad didn't come to Dads and Donuts, right? And like you just feel less than. And when you feel less than, when you feel like you don't have worth, when you feel you don't have value, as a young boy, you just don't have a lot of ways to deal with that in a positive way. And so like I feel like getting angry is just really easy. And sometimes that anger comes outward, but sometimes it's inward. And so I would say that only a few times did I really like lose my cool. But man, when I lost it, I lost it. Like I was going berserk. But most of the time, it it was probably I was angry towards myself, or I was angry towards God, or it just caused a lot of like lack of self-esteem, lack of self-confidence, lack of self-value, lack of self-worth. I mean, I was angry about the fact that I didn't have a dad. I was angry about the fact that I um, got dealt a bad hand. I was angry about the fact that I didn't have anyone to take me camping, that I didn't have anyone to show up to my games, right? And there are just a lot of opportunities um, to feel those things. And as a young boy, you can get sad, but no one wants to be sad because that's weak. But anger's not weak. Anger's actually kind of manly. Or so that is
Mm.
how, that is how other people see it. And so like if you don't have someone there to help you process that stuff in a way that's healthy, then anger is really the only tool that a young boy has. Either that or they just are apathetic. They just give up 100%. And um, yeah, so that's kind of my take on that, Sean.
You had a great mentor that challenged you to forgive your dad, and I had the same thing. I mean, your stories are very similar. I had the same thing. I had a youth pastor that said, "Hey, you need to forgive your dad," and I didn't want to, but I
No,
forgave my
no.
dad. I wrote him a letter and told him I forgave him. Um, and it was, it was awkward because I never met him until I was 15 years old, and then I wrote him a letter, and then I have a whole story of forgiveness. I'm not going to get into my story, but unpack that more. What was that like to forgive your dad? Did you actually have a conversation with him? Did you just go to God with it? How did you handle that?
Yeah, so that's actually kind of a large part of my book.
Mm.
I mean, because like who wants to forgive their dad? Like that sounds like the most awkward, hard. I mean, it is messy. It's not easy. In fact, I I would say one of the harder, if not the hardest thing that a man will ever do.
Mm.
Um, but man, I had this guy Steve, and he just kept on like, Zach, you have to forgive your dad. You have to forgive your dad. And I was like, I don't want to. I don't want to. But man, there's something powerful. There's something powerful about submitting, right? And when you submit and you surrender and say, okay, God, I'm not going to do what I want to do, but instead I'm going to trust that you put this man in my life to guide me and to instruct me. And I'm going to do what they say, especially if it lines up with the Bible, right? I mean, it's pretty clear that we need to forgive. It doesn't say forgive if. It doesn't say
Mm.
forgive if they're repentant, if they're kind, if they say, "Oh my gosh, Zach, I'm so sorry," right? It just says forgive. And so, man, I so desperately wanted freedom, Sean, that I was at this point in my life where I was like, man, whatever this guy tells me to do, I'll do because I've tried everything else and it didn't work. So I'm out of options. And so he encouraged me. He said, Zach, you need to call and you need to go see him. So I called him. He was down in San Antonio, and it was, it's, you know, my dad's a firefighter. Not the most emotional cat in the world. And I just called him, hey, Dad, I will be in San Antonio for work, which was a lie. God, I'm sorry. I'm going to be in San Diego for work. Can we have lunch? Yeah, sure. All right. I'll be sure to text you when I'm there. All right, cool. It was just that simple. So I showed up, and on the way there, I've got, I am on the phone with Steve. Steve, I can't do this. Steve, I'm terrified. Steve, I'm this. Steve, I'm that. And he's just praying for me. He's just encouraging me. I'm sitting in the parking lot, about to walk in, and I'm talking to Steve. So to encourage is to open up someone's chest and to insert courage, right? Well, he inserted the courage I needed that day to go see my dad. And I went and we ate some barbecue. And man, the first 5 or 10 minutes was so awkward. I mean, the most awkward thing that I've ever done.
Yeah.
But then the Lord in his kindness, and this has never happened before, and this hasn't ever happened since. We sat down to eat, and I said, "Hey, Dad, I want to hear your story." And he told me everything. And for 30 minutes, he was open and he was real and he was authentic. He told me about how his dad was an alcoholic. He told me about everything that my dad did to us, he experienced. And his dad wasn't the best dude in the world. His uncle wasn't the best dude in the world, right? He had a line of generational sin. And as he's telling me all of this stuff, I went from seeing my dad as this jerk who destroyed my family to he's just a guy who no one ever taught him. No one ever taught him how to be a dad. He couldn't give what he didn't have, right? And I do believe that God changed my perspective of him that day, which is a miracle. I'm going to go ahead and say that. That is a miracle. I mean, I hated him. And now I don't. So I am so thankful for that. And so, man, hey, like my thing is like, I'll talk to him on the phone once a month. I see him every year, for like a day or two. And that is, it is what it is. And so he has a relationship with my kids, which is kind of the best gift that I can give him. But yeah, man. So, if you honor your parents, it will go well for you in the land. And so I feel like I'm a testimony of that. So
Now, being a
it's not
dad,
easy.
being a dad yourself, what are some obstacles you've had to overcome with trying to, kind of get rid of your pain and your struggles from growing up, and then not put that on your kids? What are some things that you could share with guys who are going to be dads?
I mean, dude, so why I wrote this book, it's called Tell Me About Your Father. Is because as I turned into a dad, I could feel all this fatherhood stuff kind of starting to bubble up, right? Like my fear, my issues of control. How in the world do I become what I didn't ever have? I don't know how to do this, and it's terrifying. But the Lord has, God doesn't call the equipped, but he equips the called. And he called me to be a father. And so he has been faithful. And so, yeah, just like working on my anger, working on my marriage, right? I didn't ever see what it looks like to be a healthy husband. I didn't know what a healthy marriage looked like, right? So that is the focus is, man, if my marriage is good, then I'm a better father. If my marriage is bad, it doesn't matter what I do. I'm probably not going to be an awesome dad. And so how do I pursue my wife? How do I show compassion to her? How do I serve her? Right. And then just how do I be intentional with them? How do I put them above work? Right. How do I help them experience the Lord by them experiencing me? And man, just like all of this father stuff, like so much fear, so much control, so much anger, so much I don't like to ask for help, so much self-reliance, right? All of that has to disappear if I want to be a good dad. And obviously I'm going to fall short. Obviously I'm going to sin. But as long as I keep my eyes on him. But this dealing with the father one, man, it's like the gift that keeps on giving in a bad way.
Yeah.
And so, but it's kind of like, man, what a great way to be reminded of our need for God. right?
Mm.
To depend upon him and not on ourselves. Because as a kid who grew up without a father, I'm really good at depending on myself. I'm self-reliant to the max because I had to be. But God says, hey, there's a different way. Let me father you as you father your kids.
Yeah.
But yeah, man. So
Yeah, that's so good, and to help dads out. I mean, honestly, it's a challenge. It really is. You mentioned about work balance. What are some things that you've implemented to? Because guys like us are, I think a lot of times we're driven because of the childhood we
yep,
had, and so we're trying to
100%.
please God. We're trying to prove ourselves. And so, what are some things that you've implemented to make sure there is that work balance?
Man, that's a whole nother story, dude. Like um, my first not-for-profit, I asked myself this question. I think someone asked it to me actually. Who is giving your best? And for those 10 years, it wasn't my wife and it wasn't my kids. It was the ministry. And that's not good, right? Like
Yeah.
my heart was 96% good, but there's 4% of my heart that was like, yeah, I really like the fact whenever people tell me how awesome I am. I love the fact whenever you're like, oh my gosh, you're doing such good work. You're helping out these fatherless kids. And what I found was the same attention, the same affirmation, the same acceptance that I had to have as a kid. Well, I was receiving it now as an adult, but just in a different way.
Mm.
And so, man, how can I get those things from God? Right? How can I love my wife first and foremost? How can I take care of myself? How can I not burn out? How can I keep my relationship with him first and foremost? It's God, it's wife, it's kids, then it's ministry. And I had it the other way around. And that takes a ridiculous amount of faith. God, I am going to trust that instead of working 60 hours a week, I will only work 40. And I'm going to trust that you're going to still provide donors. I am going to I'm going to have faith that you're still going to show up, that you're still going to move in these kids' lives, right? There was a lot of fear that, man, if I didn't serve more kids, then people would stop funding me. Or if I didn't serve more kids, then these kids wouldn't experience you, God. But God doesn't need me. I'm so thankful that I get to be a part of what he's doing, but he doesn't need me. Anyone can start a nonprofit for these kids, but only I can be my wife's husband. Only I can be my kid's dad.
Mm.
And if I start the biggest 501c3, if I mentor 1 million kids, but my wife and my kids don't feel loved, if my wife and my kids don't like me, that's a loss, man. That's a loss. And so, man, it took a long time to figure that out. Man, how crazy is it that I would serve the fatherless and the single mom, and at home my wife felt like a single mom and my kids felt fatherless.
Yeah, that's so good.
That is the enemy jacking with you, man. He can twist, he can pervert, and he wants to take you out. He wants to take you out. And if he can destroy your marriage, and if he can jack up how your kids see you, then he wins. And that's the easiest way for him to take out anything that we do. Because if we fail in our marriage, we don't have a ministry.
Yeah,
Period. End of story.
yeah,
So, but man, he had to teach me that, and it took a while. It's taking a while. I'm still having to learn that. But
understand.
but man, he is good. He is good.
That's so good. Well, we have about 3 minutes left. I just want to wrap it up with your book. We've talked about it a little bit, but your book, tell me about your father, came out in
Mhm.
April. So it's a new book. I want to encourage people to go and search for it is it on Amazon
Oh
and
yeah.
different places like that. You can go to zachgarza.com, definitely check out this book, but tell us, we have about, like I said, about a little under 3 minutes left. Tell us more about your book and get people engaged in that. And then also any other resources you want to share.
Sure. So the book it was written for me before I dealt with my father wound. So it's a guide on the journey of dealing with growing up without a dad around. How do you prepare for the journey? How do you pinpoint ways that your father wound is negatively impacting your life? How do you process that in a healthy way? And then how can you start to proclaim what God has done? And then how can you help other people experience that same kind of freedom? So, man, it's all about dealing with the father wound. So, I encourage you to pick it up. I hope it helps you. I hope it helps you deal with your father wound and help you see God as the perfect father that He is. You can find out more, on my podcast. It's called You Can Mentor, because you can mentor. And man, we talk about all this stuff because God is a good father. He is a father to the fatherless. He's a defender of the widows. He sets the lonely in families. And man, family is good. And so I want to help people experience that. I also have a thing that helps encourage men to be positive fathers. And you can find out more at www.raisingupfathers.com. We have a thing every year that encourages men in their roles as husbands, fathers, and sons, and surrounded by a bunch of brothers. So that's me, man.
That's great. You have some great resources. Your ministry's awesome. Your story's awesome, man. I just want to encourage you to keep going. I appreciate what you do, and maybe we can look at ways that we could partner. But just thank you for being on with us today, Zach. You've been such an encouragement to me, and I believe to our audience as well.
Thanks, Sean. You're awesome, buddy.
Hey, thanks for checking out this episode of Let's Talk About Fatherlessness. We want to now challenge you to take the next step by either starting a single mom community group in your church or with your ministry, or by joining our network of God is My Dad churches and ministries. Isn't it a great experience to be able to start a single mom community group?
Yeah, and it's just, if you talk to single moms, a lot of times what they'll tell you is the one thing they're lacking is that community, just a group that they can go in and they know there's no judgment. Everyone may not have the same situation. Everyone doesn't know what they're going through, but they can go in and they know there's no judgment. And it takes that kind of that restriction and that wall down for them so that they can share and then that they can grow in Christ.
And our single mom community groups are a wonderful ministry. And if your church can start one, we'd love to have you. We can help you get set up. We have the curriculum and all the resources you need. If you can't start one, we'd love to have you start by joining our network of churches and ministries, our God is My Dad network of churches and ministries, where you can get your church or your ministry on our map, and people can find you and find your ministry in your church so that they can get plugged into your church or ministry locally. So check that out. You can find all these resources at lifefactors.org. We have books, we have all kinds of content on there at lifefactors.org. Check it out today.